Chapter 12 Years of Turmoil. Everything in the country was booming. Never had the United States experienced such prosperity. Stocks were out of sight. Later that year, 1929, the crash came. The Great Depression was at hand. The crash came on October 24th, 1929, when the stock market fell. No one wanted to buy. Everyone wanted to sell. It was unbelievable. Many who had considered themselves well off the day before found that their fortunes had been wiped out overnight. Even though the New York banks tried desperately to save the situation, their efforts were in vain. The Depression had begun. It would last 11 years and affect every man, woman, and child in the country. Businesses and factories closed. Prices of all goods dropped. Profits fell. Wages were cut, and millions of people were out of work. Conditions continually became worse rather than better until early in 1933, when the bank moratorium was put into effect. People began withdrawing their savings, which made the situation worse. Some banks closed their doors. Only a few remained open until the morning of March 4th, 1933, which was the day the newly elected President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, was to take office. The bank moratorium was called. People were aghast. Nearly everyone, including Lloyd and Margaret, lost all their savings. Their home was not paid for, and most of the stocks which Margaret had inherited were worthless. She had a few shares of Travelers stock, which remained intact, but by the time they had decided to sell, it was only worth $150 a share. Only a short time before Carolyn, their third child, was born on December 4th, 1929, it had been worth $2,000. If Margaret had sold her stock when she went east that summer, their house would have been paid for, but she was advised by their banker not to do so. In January 1930, Lloyd changed jobs. He had worked at Newlands for 4 years. He was offered a higher wages and a better position at another well-established lumber company, so he took it. Everything seemed to be running along smoothly, but conditions in the country generally worsened. Industries had to curtail wherever they could. Since Lloyd was the last to be hired by his company, he was also the first to be dismissed. This was a bitter pill to swallow. There were now 5 in the family and a home to pay for. The Depression was growing worse instead of better. The number of unemployed people in the United States kept mounting to unbelievable heights. Now Lloyd was one of them. It seemed incredible that this could happen to him. Yet Lloyd and Margaret knew that they were not alone in their plight. They learned that living has pain for everyone at one time or another. One of their main petitions to God had always been that He would see them through any adversity, and that they would have courage and strength to meet any affliction that might come to them. Hard times only seemed to draw them closer. Many of their acquaintances were far worse off than they. Some were even on the dole. Lloyd and Margaret made up their minds never to accept charity. They wore second-hand clothing given to them, and by canning and preserving quantities of fruits and vegetables, Margaret managed to feed her family on $1 a day. This did not include the milk bill. Each month she managed to pay the grocer $30. By the year of 1932, there were 12 million employed people in the United States. It was not possible to find or buy a job. Setbacks, disappointments, and heartaches followed in quick succession over the next 12 years, but Lloyd never let discouragement defeat him. There was only one thing he wanted to do: become a minister of the gospel. He seemed so well qualified for that, but how, with finances so tight and a family to support? This goal seemed absolutely impossible to attain. So Lloyd returned to insurance. He chose a very reliable company, but these were not 2 good days to write insurance. These were times of bitter grief and great discouragement. His commissions only came once a month. He was not on a salary. One month when his check was only $16, Margaret's despondency knew no bounds, yet she made no mention of it. She never showed self-pity or sympathized with Lloyd. Both kept their feelings to themselves and away from the children, knowing full well that sympathy only breeds discontent. They knew that God would see them through, and that someday these evil days would pass. When Lloyd came home night after night, following a long day's work without making a sale, and expressed shame because he had failed, Margaret would say, "You must not consider yourself a disgrace, dear. You have tried hard. What more can you do?" He would reply, "But the family must eat, and the payments must be made on the house." "Never feel shame for trying and failing, dear, for he who has never failed is he who has never tried," she quoted. They might have become bitter, but they never did. They took defeat after defeat calmly, always trusting in God and looking ahead to better times. Even during these dark days, Margaret's dream of Lloyd becoming a minister never faded from her consciousness. They learned that failure and success are rarely a state of mind, and that good living and growing a soul are of more importance than financial success. In fact, that they are the key to real success. Down deep in his heart, Lloyd knew that failure would never overtake him if he had a strong determination to succeed. He continually cultivated his spiritual life by spending long hours in meditation and prayer. In fact, he acquired the true art of meditation. All of these experiences were preparing him for a life of the ministry which lay ahead. He learned to live one day at a time, and this practice always continued to be his pattern for living. Through his persistence and frugality they practiced together, and through their staunch faith in God, Lloyd and Margaret were able to surmount the many obstacles that stood in their way, and somehow weather the storm of those dire depression days. However, during these days they never complained, nor were they envious of their friends or fellow salesmen who fared better than they. Tears were never shed over the loss or lack of sale. Both knew that better days were just around the corner as those fateful 12 long years progressed. Although during this time all their savings were swept away, Lloyd and Margaret had the kind of security that lasts a lifetime: love for each other, belief in each other, and a hope for a better day. This love and security was always felt by their children, although it was necessary to deny them so many material things. Any couple with such a solid foundation of love and mutual respect for each other could not help but succeed in marriage. Even though the odds seemed to be against them so often, Lloyd and Margaret never lost faith in God or in each other. They cut corners wherever they could, but they never cut their contribution to the church. One evening at the dinner table, Lloyd brought up the subject of tithing. The evening meal was always eaten in the dining room when all the family was present. This was the only time they were always together, so family problems were often discussed during the meal. After some discussion, Lloyd said, "You know, it looks as if we are on the way to the poorhouse, but if we must go, I'd like to go tithing." Everyone agreed that that would be a good plan. The Zoshkis have made this a practice ever since, and great joy has come from it. Lloyd and Margaret both believed that the church was the greatest institution on earth, and they never ceased to have faith in its founder, Jesus Christ. They gave every ounce of strength they had to promote its cause. Lloyd was now a deacon in the First Baptist Church of Benton Harbor and the superintendent of the Sunday school, and both were teaching in the church school. Margaret and Lloyd became parents of another son during the Depression. Lloyd Frederick was born on Easter Sunday, early before the dawn on the first day of the week, on April 21st, 1935. Now their family was complete. They had 2 sons and 2 daughters. This was the family they had always dreamed of having, and they rejoiced over their good fortune. But alas, the day after Frederick's arrival, they had planned to call him Fred after Margaret's beloved father, Mr. Fred. Their parents were informed that their child had jaundice, which was considered very serious in newborn babies. The baby's skin was sallow yellow. Margaret thought he looked like a little Chinaman as she finally snuggled him to her breast. On the morning of the 3rd day, their doctor came into the room to draw a pint of blood from Margaret's arm to inject in her baby. She gladly gave her blood to save the life of her little son. Her doctor explained that this was the last discovery in medical science for the treatment of jaundice in newborn babies. Within 10 days, they were able to take him home. It was during this period that Lloyd lost his mother, who died on the 9th of September, 1940, at the age of 82. This was a blow to the family, the first death to take place in the Zoshki family since Margaret and Lloyd's marriage. The following year, they received another real blow. Lloyd was in Newark, New Jersey at the time, attending a meeting of the Mutual Benefit Life Insurance Company, of which he was now a representative. He and 2 other salesmen from the Grand Rapids agency had been sent there. He was to be gone a week. The day after he left, Margaret received a letter through the mail from the state health department informing them that their eldest child, Ruth, who was now a senior in Benton Harbor High School, had an active TB. That fall, all of the students in the senior high school of over 1,000 had been given a patch test for TB. Out of that number, 200 had a positive reaction and were obligated to have x-rays. Ruth was one of these students. However, all who were given the second test had been persuaded that in spite of the positive reaction from the patch test, it did not necessarily mean that they had active TB and would require hospitalization. Since Ruth appeared to have no other symptoms, Lloyd and Margaret had dismissed the idea from their minds completely. Consequently, when the letter came on that bleak February morning when Margaret was all alone, it struck a sound blow. She sat down and held the letter in her lap, scarcely moving a muscle, and staring blankly straight ahead. What should she do now? Lloyd would not be home to talk the matter over with until the end of the week. There was only one to turn to. So she bit her lip and then relaxed as she started to pray. Everything seemed to fall into focus now. She felt more calm, and the heavy burden and remorse she had felt a few moments before appeared to roll off her shoulders. She knew exactly what she was supposed to do. She would hide the letter and say nothing to anyone until Lloyd returned home. So she rose from her knees and placed the letter in the upper drawer of Lloyd's chiffonier. She would not even mention it to the children, and Ruth would be allowed to continue to go to school that week. She'd been attending regularly all fall. Surely 3 or 4 more days would not matter to anyone. One thing was sure. Margaret had made up her mind that she would not burden Lloyd with the news when she wrote him later in the day. The waiting was not easy. She thought about it all day long and far into the night. She could not bear the thought of having to send her darling daughter to a TB sanitarium. The letter had stated that it would be necessary for Ruth to go to a TB sanitarium for treatment and complete rest. They were to get in touch with the country health nurse, Emma Arnold, immediately to work out all the details. Margaret could not believe it. Why should their daughter be one of the only 2 active cases in the whole senior high school? It was incredible. She knew that the feeling of humiliation which seemed to sweep over her must be ejected from her mind. The spirit would not have to work on. This spirit she would have to work on. Certainly she would not let anyone else know about this. Oh, if Lloyd were only home to suffer with her. Somehow she managed to keep things running normally at home, and none of the children sensed their mother's anxiety. For this she was thankful. Lloyd arrived back home at the end of the week, tired from a long trip and very glad to be home again. Margaret's impulse was to tell him the bad news right away, but the children were around and she was obliged to keep her secret a little longer. However, after supper, when they were alone, Margaret got the letter out of its hiding place and handed it to Lloyd. As he read it, tears welled up in his eyes, but neither of them said a word for a long few minutes. Then Lloyd said, "Have you told Ruth?" Margaret replied that she had not. "I thought it would be best to wait until you came so we could both tell her together," she said. "I didn't have the heart to tell her," she added. "Where's Ruth now?" he asked. "Up in her room, I think." "Well, let's call her down and tell her now. We might as well get it over with." So that is what they did. All 3 of them kept their composure. The parents very frankly explained the contents of the letter, and they all decided that if she must go away, the sooner plans were made for her to do so, the better. No emotion was shown over the incident. Each remained calm and collected. Margaret went on to the phone and called Mrs. Arnold, who promised to come see them on Monday morning. When she came, she had all the plans made for Ruth to enter the sanitarium at Pine Rest in Tumoil, Michigan, 40 miles north of Benton Harbor that week. After Miss Arnold left, Margaret and Ruth engaged in getting her clothes in order and went shopping for the necessary items. On the next morning, Lloyd and Margaret accompanied Ruth to the sanitarium. They felt it was the hardest thing they had ever done in their lives, but nothing of that nature was spoken. They were comforted only by the realization that by proper care and treatment, Ruth would be cured. So each accepted this ordeal resolutely and without shedding any tears in the presence of each other, although they all did at parting. Ruth was put to bed immediately at the sand. They kissed her goodbye and walked down the stairs to the entrance with heavy hearts. Ruth shed a few tears after her parents left, but soon became calm and accepted the experience with confidence and hoped that her stay would not be long. However, the days and weeks of constant bed care continued into months, and she was obliged to remain at the sand for a year and 1 month. In the meantime, she kept up with her studies and graduated the following June, a few days after her class commencement exercises in Benton Harbor. The other senior, a boy who had been hospitalized at the same time as Ruth, was there also and received his diploma at the same time. The principal, Charles Semler, had made the presentation to the two graduates while they sat in wheelchairs, clothed in their pajamas and robes. Ruth's pastor, Dr. Ernest Snodgrass, was present and offered prayer. About a dozen relatives and close friends of the two were present in the lobby where exercises took place. By the fall of 1941, Ruth was allowed to be dressed and to take a walk every day, which was increased gradually. Her parents visited her at least twice a week during her confinement, and as time went on, she was allowed to go for a ride each time they came. Finally, the great day came for her to be discharged. She left the sand for a far healthier and stronger person in every way. The battle against TB had been won. Ruth returned home 13 months after entering the sanitarium, a healthier and happy person than when she entered. She found a good job and went to work soon after her return, and the following year was married to Leroy J. Cordovelle of St. Joseph. Margaret and Lloyd gave them a lovely church wedding on October 21st, 1943. Milton was in the service at this time, and the family moved to Fair Plain the following year. In the later part of 1946, Lloyd's eldest sister, Amy, died of cancer. She was only 56 years old. Lloyd had been very close to her. A year before she passed away, when she realized her days left on this earth were very few, she penned the following letter to him, which he cherishes. It is written on a Christmas card in her own beautiful handwriting. December 1945. Dear Lloyd, at this beautiful time of year my thoughts again turn to Thanksgiving, and I know of no one I'd rather say thank you to than you. You'll never know how grateful I am to you for all the help you've given me during the past year. I didn't realize at times just how sick I really was, but now I understand and know you were there when I needed you the most. I do appreciate all you've done for me, more than I can say, and even if you cannot understand my gratitude here, you will in glory. God bless you always. Love, Amy. The result of a sneeze. On Valentine's Day, 1946, Lloyd had a very severe fall. He was working at Beverly Lumber Company and driven to Grand Mere to check on an installating job. It was a cold, rainy day. The house he was investigating was on a knoll overlooking Lake Michigan. There were several cement block steps leading up the path to the house. He left his car at the foot of the hill and was not gone long, but while he was there, the temperature fell and the rain on the ground changed to ice. Realizing this hazard, he thought he was being extra cautious when leaving the building to go back to his car. But just as he got to the last step, his foot slipped and he fell, dead weight, striking his side against the sharp corner of the cement block. He lay there a few minutes, not being able to move. When the carpenter had heard the thud of his fall, came hurrying out to investigate. He was surprised to see him lying there helpless, but relieved because he had told Lloyd the sound was so great that he thought he had reached his car and run into a tree. The carpenter helped Lloyd up into his car, as he insisted that he was all right and was quite able to drive home. He drove with difficulty back to the lumber company, which was a distance of 10 miles. When they saw how pale he was, one of the employees took him home, and he went right to bed. 4 days later, he was taken with such excruciating pain in his back that he could not move. This appeared all of a sudden in the evening, as their friend was calling on him. Margaret notified their surgeon doctor at once, who told her to get an ambulance and bring him immediately to the hospital. The next few days he was given x-rays and all kinds of tests, but to no avail. Nothing showed up. There was no damage to the kidneys as had been feared, but he had no blood pressure for 11 days. The heart specialist called it fibrillation and said that the heart was not pumping blood. Dr. Ruth brought the nurse to listen. This was a rare case that they did not expect him to recover. Medical science was doing everything they knew how. There were 4 specialists taking care of him. Margaret and the family were in the height of despair. She had called upon several ministers to pray for him. Then on the evening of the 10th day, she laid her hands on him as she earnestly prayed for his recovery. And as soon as it happened, Lloyd says, "I'm going to have to sneeze." He tried to keep from it. He was sure it would kill him. The ceiling seemed to come down 2 feet. Everything in the room went up and down. But the shock of that sneeze straightened out his heart, and it became normal again. The next morning, when Dr. Ruth examined him, he said, "Your heart is perfect. 13 out of 13 beats is good enough for me." Lloyd replied, "My heart has always been all right." "That's what you think," retorted the doctor. "It only took a shock like that sneeze to straighten it out." Then he added, "You may go home tomorrow." Lloyd and Margaret always attributed that sneeze to answered prayer. Lloyd fully recovered from this incident and was well enough to participate in the wedding plans of his younger daughter, Carolyn, who was married that spring to Floyd R. Cordovell, a brother of Ruth's husband. They were the first of their children to make Lloyd and Margaret grandparents, which brought added joy to the family.